right, welcome you guys to our second shift in Shifting the Balance for grades 3 through 6. We were supposed to have read chapter 2, so we're going to go through. I think the first 3 misunderstandings are the most important ones, truthfully. I'll touch on 4 and 5, but the first 3 are the most important ones for today. And just so that you know, here's a reminder of where we've been. We looked at how knowledge impacts comprehension, and now we're on the role of strategy instruction in the role of comprehension today. Here's Scarborough's rope again. All of those different components make a skilled reader, right? The tighter we can make it, the more fluent they are, the more they can comprehend. We went through that last time. Same goals as last time. Look at misunderstandings, develop new understandings, and think about how we can create small shifts. First one, comprehension is a skill. And I have to admit, I thought about it that way for a long time in my teaching career. And as I started teaching actually AP language and composition at the high school level, I was like, no, this is definitely an outcome, and how do we get there? So that's kind of what we're talking about this morning. New understanding, comprehension is an outcome of many different processes to create a mental model, and I like the image that they had. When you look at active self-regulation, and we know that some of our kids have major issues with that, right? So right away, out of the gate, some kids are going to be behind, right? When we look at this. Then you have to combine word recognition, bridging the processes, language comprehension, all to read. So I like how they looked at that. When I think about this, I think about how some of our kids have attention issues, have working memory issues, have processing issues, and how do we get them to still comprehend even with all of those factors in play? Okay, so when we look at word recognition, that's our decoding, our attention, how many times do we have to redirect kids when they're actually focused on the material? Their processing issues. When we look at all these things, how can we still help them create a mental model that Cunningham, Yates, and Birkins suggest they need in order to comprehend? So, comprehension, outcome of many different processes that we just looked at that image to look at those different ways that we need to utilize in order for them to create that mental model. Here's our discussion. After reading that particular section of the chapter, how does the idea of building a mental model fit in with your previous understanding about how children comprehend? That's the first question. And how might you help students build and strengthen the mental models they form as they read? I think as we go on, it'll become clearer, especially with that third misunderstanding of how we do that. But I want to know your thoughts right now. You guys can talk with your grade level teams for about, let's do about 3 minutes for this one. Okay?
I'm looking at my notes. Page 46, so like I highlighted some stuff up here because this was like, I use this a lot, like, this is kind of like the last time we were talking about math, like, we're doing like puzzles and stuff, and the kids don't have that little bit of background knowledge, like for context, like they really struggle if they are good at that skill. So, for me, the last time is just trying to like, we're doing some, how am I always trying to tell storyteller or add context for kids who are missing that subcontext.
And just model.
Sorry, after I had those conversations with kids at my desk, like about the word problem, like, oh, this is kind of like when you live as well, but when you're in a store and you're checking things out and just trying to get them to think about time, about time where I've done that before, or like we talk about something in compact, I'm like, how many of you have done this with your, oh no, it's regular, it's about brackets cooking, like how many of you have ever seen your parents cook? Like trying to tie it into
Yeah, I know. And I think that goes to the fifth understanding, where like when it's student centric. context and it's not just for a strategy, that the kids relate better. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But even for math, when I'm thinking about the word problems, I think when we get to the second misunderstanding, when you can unpack that prompt, look at the words that they need to know, the vocabulary in it, all of that kind of stuff. So that's kind of where because I know some folks are more. Oh no, you guys do everything. That's right, because you're third, fourth grade is state environment. Yeah, that's right. I was trying to figure out how they can relate to this.
Yeah, I highlighted it. I like, and when I read that, I like, for me, like, just read the Victor part.
All right, you guys, please bring it back. Finish up your last thought.
Here. Oh, yes, like these type of words. Like you can't wait until she shows up to, that's always the first thing you're supposed to do.
Would anybody care to share out something that you discussed that you thought was important?
Well, our first unit, we do a lot of talking, because the third graders, all of a sudden, they have chapter books with no pictures. So that's a large part of our first unit is, they have to create images in their head, or otherwise the understanding is gone. And we try to emphasize that that's fun, because then, the way that you picture it, it's individual. And then we were talking about another student who, even though her reading level is pretty low, she can read, if it's something that she's interested, that she has those mental images already kind of her comprehension.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
I just said that making background knowledge, and creating background knowledge will help them comprehend and understand. It says, for example, I was saying in the Fountas of Canal, they've got, I think it's level S is the book about fishing. Well, they do really well on that, but the one before that's about walking along a cliffside, which they don't have the prior knowledge or background knowledge, and then they don't do as well in the comprehension. So sometimes it's really, as it says in the book.
It's really dependent on what the topic is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that,
We think of those assessments too, that plays a huge factor in scores sometimes.
I completely agree. And I think that goes back to our first shift from last time, how important that background knowledge is and
Yes.
what can we do to really beef that up with our kids, giving them a diverse perspective on the world too, right? That it's not just, you're not just in Elkhorn.
When we went to Milwaukee to the Discovery World too, some kids have never been to Milwaukee, so even to drive down the freeway was like, oh. And then when they saw Miller Park, it was like, and the buildings, and then there was, diversity and, in the museum, and some of the kids were like, their eyes just were like, wow. It's like, how sad that we're 20 minutes down the road and they can't get this far with parents.
Right. Yep. Stephanie?
I didn't say this in the group, but I just thought too, like, sometimes if they have, like, their personal mental models can also be a hurdle for them as and I think we were taking a test and it was a question about, like, a farmer, on fractions, about a question about a farmer having a rectangular farm, so draw it, so the student, he drew it, and then it was like, now, corn is grown on a fifth of the field, draw it, and he could not get past the fact that that doesn't make any sense, because why would a farmer only grow corn on a fifth of it and not the whole thing? And I tried to be like, it's just a word problem, it's okay, he couldn't get past it, so finally I was like, all right, let's just not do the problem. Cause he couldn't see past it, and he was like, that makes no sense, like, why would you grow corn here and then grow wheat there, like, no farmer does that. And I was like, yeah, I understand, but then he couldn't let it go. So I think sometimes too, that can be a hurdle for them as they're, they've made sense of things in their head, so, yeah, that was interesting.
Good.
Yes, it was.
Misunderstanding too. Students need a lot of different strategies to comprehend well. This one I kind of chuckled with because I feel like as a district, right, we at one point I remember in the past decade, we were kind of inundated with a whole bunch of strategies. Try this and try this and try this and try this, instead of just really getting good at a handful of them. Yeah, did anybody else have that experience? I remember having that experience. I was like, holy cow, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed here. So it was kind of reassuring to me to go, oh, we don't need everything to help kids understand. So a small number of strategies or thinking moves are important and needed to be combined with background knowledge and working memory. So the background knowledge that Jeff alluded to and our working memory. And I can't emphasize this enough, the memory piece of it. And those of us who've worked with kids, right, in tier 2, tier 2B, tier 3, which is all of us, we see that they will read something and they'll forget it, right? The next paragraph, it's gone. So the importance of chunking and summarizing after each little chunk of text is so important, even if it's just a phrase, right, that they can remember. Because as they go up, right, up our pipeline to high school, and they're reading whole novels, and they're reading, you know, some pretty meaty informational texts, they are sunk if they're not doing that. And it has to be just a common practice. They're used to doing it all the time. Even if, like I said, even if it's just a phrase. So this is the big part, and I think I have to click on this. If you don't, can you, yeah, sorry. To me, this was the meat of the chapter. Thanks. Our 6 moves. And I think the more that we can get used to doing these 6 moves and the kids getting used to us doing these 6 moves, the better their comprehension's going to get. So, activating prior knowledge, you guys do that all the time. I see that with KWLs that you guys do. You will show a map of the region that you're talking about. You guys do this in all different ways. Can you guys think of some other ways that you do this besides KWLs and maps and things where you activate that background?
I just Google things. I just quickly, like, hey, here's a picture of what this looks like. Here's this, you know, whatever, dot, dot, dot. And they're like, oh. So I just sometimes use Google.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be elaborate, you guys. It can just be an image.
I was
Yep.
gonna say sometimes just referring to previous readings, you know, that would be, there's a comparison or contrasting.
Yep, connecting anything they're learning, especially across subject areas. I mean, you guys are kind of lucky because you teach it all, so you know what you just talked about in science or social studies. And that is really helpful. I mean, I will say even in tier 3 intervention right now, I know what they're going to be exposed to curriculum-wise in middle school and high school. So I'm purposely picking texts that will lead to perhaps them having that background knowledge at a later date. They don't know I'm doing that, but that's what I'm doing. And they're like, so sometimes they're like, why are we reading about this? I'm like, oh, because I think you'll really enjoy this and it might be important for later on, right? So I'm thinking years down the road for them sometimes when I'm doing that intervention. But the more that you guys can make those connections, the better it'll be. Notice the structures. So to me, I know, for example, that, and I haven't been in everybody's classrooms, except for I've been in a lot of the 4th grade classrooms because I do indoor recess. And I know that Jill is doing this right to the hilt. She's got anchor charts on her wall. You know, here are the text structures. And she's got signal words that she's using with the kids. Look for this word. And I think that's a big piece of it. But then when you look at what else they need, there are other things, right, that we need to be looking at as well. And that'll be in misunderstanding 3 that we get into that piece. Keeping a close eye on comprehension, monitoring, clarity. This is the looking at each section chunk by chunk or paragraph by paragraph and just having them summarize it or put down a phrase even about what they're reading so that they can mentally go back and visually go back and go, oh, that's what that was about, without having to reread everything. Because it's like they're restarting every time. If you're asking them to summarize the whole piece of text and they don't have any of those little summaries, it seems impossible to them. Like it's really hard. So, I was just having, it was interesting, I was having a discussion last night with the special education teachers, and we were talking about the pieces of text structure, and we were talking more about, sorry, keeping a close eye on comprehension, we were talking more about the individual words and how kids, even though we say the same words like text, compare, contrast over and over again, they might not know what they mean, especially for the testing environment, right? For the forward exam that's coming up. And how we can explicitly teach that vocabulary before they're taken. And I think many of us are doing that, but trying to do that across subject areas is really important. I know that we just had that as part of our grade level vocabulary when we were doing testing at the high school. And a lot of the kids thought that compare only meant similarities. They didn't know that it also meant differences. They knew that contrast meant differences, but they didn't know that compare meant similarities and differences. They're like, oh, we didn't know that. So a bunch of kids were getting things incorrect in their writing, right, when they were doing their writing samples because they were missing half of the rubric that they were getting graded on, so.
It happens a lot in math too.
I bet.
Like a simple one like simplify or evaluate, and the difference between the two. So evaluate, you need a value, a number answer, as compared to simplify means, take what you can
And keep
make it
moving on.
easier.
Yep. Yeah, and I think what's even more difficult is that the test that the kids are taking might mean something different, right, for those vocabulary words than we have taught.
Like the summary sentence is what we're, in our writing, we're like, it's gonna say, summary sentence, that's your conclusion, because we're so used to saying conclusion or whatever.
Yeah,
That's something we're talking about right now.
and having that common vocabulary, right,
Mhm.
across the grade level, good. Questions? The dig below the surface. This is where I was kind of laughing because they talked about Bloom's taxonomy. We had this already built in with our AVID structures, so CASA's levels of higher questioning. And I'm going to bring those in the next time we meet so that you can see all the different question frames for each of the subject areas they have and how easy it is for kids to make those questions once they start getting into it. My tier 3 kids are doing that a lot with their texts, especially in the nonfiction texts, so they can understand everything that's going on. And I would say this, at first it's tricky, right, for them to get the process down, but once they have it, it just works. Then there are kids like, I'm thinking like Emmy, right? She's doing that automatically when she's reading. Like, you don't have to ask her to do Acasta's level of higher questioning example because she's doing it. You guys all know kids that are doing this just immediately when they're reading. But the kids who aren't, we have to, sounds bad, but we have to force them to do it so that they understand that's part of how they read. And then summing up the summaries, how important that is. And I know that, Jeff, at the beginning of the year, you did your notes, you had your notes, and when they were looking at you for AVID, and then they came in and you had them write a summary.
Summarize, yeah. the next
Yeah.
year.
Yep, so summaries, not just for our reading, but for our writing, for lecture taking, all of those things.
Want back to the presentation now?
Yes, please. Okay, so we might not even get to 3 today, we'll see. I'll give you guys in just a couple of minutes, focus on 2 of these that you think are important, that you wanna discuss for each table. How about we do, let's do the first 2 questions over to this table. Let's do the last 3 questions to these 2 tables, if that's okay, okay? The last 3 here, the first 2 there. Go over here.
I think what I've noticed is,
Can we look
when
at
we
the
do
moves
our
though?
mentor
Yes,
tests and we
yes.
talk about.
Oh, you want-
we're
yes,
thinking
you want
of
the moves up,
questioning
yeah.
and all that, the kids are that.
Here, I'll give you mine.
No, you know,
I've got
that they're
mine.
able to
Yeah, I have a
respond
Just a second.
in a higher level because it's a familiar book that we're doing. And then when they go on their own and do their own book, I think it's down. They know how to speak.
Some of those, especially like chunking, yes, we talked about that, but I feel like we talked about more community.
Okay.
I don't know, why are you doing that?
Summary, it's like 2 sentences. I feel like the last couple of like summarize a person's life.
Yeah, and I'm gonna say, we were talking about this yesterday, like,
Yeah,
they
it's
do
in
not
Warren County.
have figurative language, and talking like proverbs and all that, so like,
And?
we're getting that really big.
It's the big important key details that we wanna put.
They leave out
And that's
like,
really
the most
fascinating.
important information.
So,
you know?
Why they were important.
yesterday, we
Some
were
girl
just
asked me
like,
if she
hold the
could hear,
phone.
so we did.
Okay,
that
and I
is-
was like, you guys know what that means? Cause like, they don't, that's not
It
even
was the
expression,
whole
that's all. So like,
That's
like, you have so much stuff when we were reading, I'm like, what do you think that means? You know, like that kind of thing.
Yes, so what do we have down?
Yep.
No,
We have the last,
right now.
That's exactly right. Well, what we used to do too, you know, back in the day is, we're gonna read something and here's the question,
Well,
we
and the
focus
biggest
on
thing
how
is,
to answer
we
that
have to
question.
teach
And those
kids
questions
to
were,
use
you know,
these things.
higher
Like,
level
we have
thinking
things all
questions
around
too,
the
where
room.
we
Yesterday,
modeled
we
did
were
that.
actually
Now
like
it's,
5 questions.
I know
for
this because I forgot.
Yeah.
Two of them would be
Like, I know
basic
it's not
criteria
description,
questions,
it's
just so they could get some right.
Correct.
And then one would be kind of.
One person.
The last
Yeah,
two
but it's
would be
still,
really
it's like, I
You
know.
know, I mean, that's how, I'm like, that's how
They
you know.
struggled at first, but they got good at it.
Yeah.
Part of the Bible, which is students is the ideas of classroom.
Yeah.
right.
So.
If it's not there,
By the beginning of the year,
Just read
how the
it.
embryos,
Yep.
how much they were.
I know.
Yep.
I agree, I think that is one of the worst things, it's hard to teach.
And for them, it's just like highlight everything.
Cause it's more
They don't
nebulous.
like.
See, and it's like, you need to do it all the time, and that's something I'm still confused, so, hey, we did it, now we're gonna move on to, like, this skill, like, you know.
Right,
we're
I
just
know,
having
we're in the
to
next
be-
one. Yep.
You know, I mean, at the beginning it was, yes, but as we're continuing, you know, they do get better. You're like, so, but that's just sit there when they're reading,
I know.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then-
me
then
being
when we're doing
struggling
that,
to
we miss
learn
out on the
and
chance to
whatever
look
too,
at,
I just wanna read because it's fun,
And
so
summaries.
I don't wanna think about things, I'm just reading because it's an enjoyable thing to
Yeah,
do.
I mean,
But now you
and
want me
some
to do
kids
all
like
these
are
other things
impressed, and
where
then others it's
my
like.
brain is down.
So we just did
It's
it.
kinda
So,
like,
that's
like
like
Taylor's, like I said, I want you to read a book, I'm not gonna ask
You just
anything.
retold
Write
the
every
story.
single
Yeah.
summary, enjoy reading it short and sweet, she did,
So, yeah.
you know, some kids, you just have to sometimes read just for fun.
Okay, guys, I'm gonna bring you back. I knew this would happen, that we were going to not have enough time this time. So, we are not going to read a new chapter for March. I've kind of made that executive decision. I would like you guys, instead, I'm gonna skip to the end, we'll go back here next time. I would like you guys to bring an example of a small shift that you're doing. I know many of you are doing this anyway with your forward exam stuff. You've kind of had to, right? With the data and getting ready for forward. If you could bring in a small example of one of those shifts that one of those processes that we just looked at, one of those 6, and how you changed something. Like you added something into what you've done, you've added an activity, whatever it is. I will say this, if you need an idea, and you're like, I just don't know what to do for that, feel free to look at the last pages, it gives you ideas. Like on page 69 and 70, the reciprocal teaching, that's one idea. It could be as simple as looking at a sentence with students and then unpacking it. So it could be looking at vocabulary in a sentence, then, is it a declarative sentence, an interrogative sentence, what kind of sentence it is, how does that change the meaning? Just one example, and then bring that back, so we're gonna share that in March, so no reading for next time. I'm gonna finish this chapter with you, we're gonna look at some examples of small shifts that you're doing. If you're math, unpacking one of your word problems, right, is a great way to do that. And if you guys need help in thinking about how to do that, I'm always available. I would love to do that, okay? So March 13th, I think, is going to be the next one because we have some things going on the week before spring break.
It's a 3-day week, so.
Yeah.
I
So,
would say March.
March 13th, you guys, if you
That's
just bring
fast
that
turnaround,
example.
Considering today's February.
I know.
Which is fine, nobody's gotta read anything new.
Right, you don't have to,
Try
just,
something else.
we're pivoting anyway with Forward. I thought it'd be a great way to just do that. So thank you for your attention and your time.
Good discussion, everybody.